Hello, I'm Namo Abdulla and welcome to Inside America. What the US government now knows about our lives is unprecedented. In this age of globalized modern technology, we seem to not have the ability to prevent the US National Security Agency, or NSA, from tapping into phone conversations, reading text messages and emails, and monitoring all manner of online activities. Even the leaders of European countries, America's best friends, have become subjected to NSA's spying activities. Just one of the recently leaked internal documents by fugitive former NSA contractor Edward Snowden demonstrates that each day the US government is gathering nearly 5 billion records on the whereabouts of cell phones around the world, without the cell phone even needing to be turned on. President Barack Obama has defended his government's spying activities as being necessary for the security of its citizens and allies. But he says in this internet age, it is important to understand that you cannot have 100% security and then have 100% privacy. But how much has individual privacy been invaded? In this increasingly interconnected world, have privacy and security become incompatible goals? While joining me to debate this subject is Ray McGovern, a retired CIA officer serving at the intelligence agency for 27 years. He's currently an intelligence activist criticizing some of NSA's global spying activities. He's called Julian Assange, the founder of whistleblowing site WikiLeaks, a hero. We're also joined by James Kirchick, a reporter, foreign correspondent, and columnist. He's a fellow with the Foreign Policy Initiative, a conservative think tank here in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to start off with you, James. How much of our individual privacy has been invaded by the NSA, National Security Agency?
Well, I have to disagree with your introduction where you said that all these phone calls and emails and the contents of conversations and communications are being monitored. That's just not true.
I didn't say that. I said we have virtually lost the ability to prevent that.
I still take issue with it because I think it's been misportrayed in the media. What we're talking about is metadata. We're talking about records of phone calls being made, what numbers are calling which numbers, it's patterns that's being analyzed. It's not everyone's emails and the contents and the conversations and the actual texts of emails and text messages and the actual conversations that are all being listened to. It's very complicated sets of data that are being scanned by computers for patterns that might indicate suspicious activity. So I don't consider this a major breach of privacy. I think that the media has been, elements of the media have been quite hysterical and sensationalistic in portraying this as being like 1984 or Big Brother.
So you think what Edward Snowden has done is wrong?
Yes, I do.
James, what's your response to that? Do you think our privacy has been invaded by the U.S. government?
Well, sure it has. You know, if you look at the amendments to our Constitution, the fourth is very explicit, and it comes out of the history of our founders who risked their own necks to put these amendments in our Constitution. And it reads, the right to people to be secure from unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue except upon probable cause, explicitly defining the area to be searched or the people or things to be seized. Now, General Hayden, who was head of NSA from 1999 to 2004, says, no, probable cause is not mentioned in the Fourth Amendment. Well, I couldn't believe it. He didn't say that in private. He said that at the National Press Club. It's obviously wrong, but he thinks he can say that and no one will take note, and guess what? He was right. The mainstream media did not take note. So I have a special problem here. I don't know if others served in our armed forces, but as an officer in the United States Army, I took a solemn pledge to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So did Ed Snowden. It shouldn't be a curiosity that he took that pledge seriously, and when he found the Fourth Amendment being violated right and left and found himself a participant in this violation, he decided to do the right thing, and that is honor his promise, honor his oath, really.
We have a court system in this country, and it is not up to a single analyst at the CIA or the NSA, a contractor, to decide for himself and to act as judge and jury when he thinks the law has been violated. He could have gone to Congress. He could have gone to his superiors. There are many channels legally through
That's
which
quite a fair point.
through which he could have gone.
Right.
He chose not to.
Why did he choose to leave the United States for Hong Kong and then Russia? Those are two of the biggest America's enemies.
I was with Ed Snowden, okay, on the 9th of October. We asked him these questions, okay? He looked at Tom Drake.
You met him in person.
That's
He
correct.
went to Moscow.
I was in Moscow, yeah. And Tom Drake, who with the NSA did not divulge any classified information, just terrible information about gross waste and abuse in the billions of dollars, okay? He finally couldn't get any satisfaction from the Inspector General of NSA, the Inspector General of the Pentagon, or the Congress, and decided the American people need to know about this gross waste and abuse, went to the Baltimore Sun. He was subjected to 4 years of not prosecution, persecution. And when the judge in Maryland, with the public defender defending Drake because he was broke by then, the public defender was there, the judge said, look, don't you Justice Department lawyers, and there were 6 of them on the case, don't you ever bring a case like this before me again. 10 felony counts, all of them dismissed out of hand. But he went through 4 years of persecution. So when we walked in there, Snowden looked at Drake and said, my God, this is the guy who's responsible for me learning from his example, i.e. you can't get anything done by going
I would say this actually
channels,
proves my
and
point.
that's why I'm free.
We have an independent judiciary, and I'm not as familiar with you are with this case that you mentioned, but the way you make it sound, he was found innocent. This is an independent judicial system we have in the United States. Edward Snowden could have chosen to face the music. If he really believed that what he was doing was right, he could have gone through the legal processes. Instead, he went to Russia, which is a dictatorship, and any criticisms you might have, sir, of intelligence practices in this country and how American citizens are, quote, spied on by the U.S. government, they pale in comparison to what is done in that bastion of liberty, Russia. That's where he chose to go. He's a defector and he's a traitor.
But let's stay a little bit with the notion of individual liberty and privacy. Like in more concrete terms, right, can you tell me why we as individuals should be concerned about what the NSA is doing?
Well, I just repeated verbatim the Fourth Amendment to you.
Can you cite a single example of a single person whose rights have been violated by the NSA?
Please, let me finish. Americans take, at least some of us do, those are sworn to uphold the Constitution, take our swearing, our oath very seriously. Now, you mentioned China and Russia. Now, you certainly know that he had no intention of ending up in Russia. It was
I don't know that. I don't know that.
It was, well, you ought to read up on this because it was the State Department pulling his passport that required him to stay.
This actually looks like this may have been an FSB operation from the very beginning. That's what it looks like to people who are watching from the outside.
FS being what? Being what?
The Russian intelligence services.
Oh, wow. Talk about
it's more than a coincidence
that
it's just he happens to wind up in Russia, and all the leaks that have been coming out,
James,
who do they benefit?
James,
they're benefiting Vladimir Putin.
Look, his passport was pulled. He was stateless by virtue of the fact that John Kerry said, we'll pull his passport, and you, Putin, you have to surrender him. There's no
How would you expect the U.S. government to respond to someone who defects?
I would expect the U.S. government, if they wanted Edward Snowden, not to pull his passport, but to go through diplomatic channels and say, Mr. Putin, we would like you to extradite him. Mr. Putin would have said, sorry, there's no extradition treaty. Under international law, I'm obliged to accept him, and he chose the high road, and he did that. Now, he did that despite the fact...
You're so charitable to Vladimir Putin.
James,
I wish you were as charitable to our leaders.
Despite the fact that he's an intelligence officer, right? The last thing he wants to do is create a precedent where Russian intelligence officers can think they can get away with this kind of thing. So it went against the grain. It went against the grain for an intelligence officer to do that, and I know that because I worked in intelligence for 30 years.
James, aren't you worried about the most recent revelation of Edward Snowden? What it says that the NSA is monitoring or is tracking the whereabouts of 5 billion cell phone users around the world. It basically knows where you are, like almost precisely. Like it knows if you're on a bus or if you're in a hotel room. Or isn't that really a worry for us?
I think that this is a debate we need to be having, and I think that I think we are having this debate, and I think that when you purchase a cell phone, when you get a cell phone plan, you're not This is part of. I mean, a cell phone is like a radio, essentially. That's the technology. And if we want to limit, the powers of the U.S. government into how much access they have to phone records, then we can have that debate in Congress.
So
we can have a debate in Congress. This is not. It's not helped by what Edward Snowden's been doing. This is a political question.
Then why did our top national security officials lie about it? Why did James Clapper say we are not conducting any information at all on millions or tens of millions of Americans? He lied under oath and said, then he apologized by saying, I said clearly erroneous things. Now, Alexander, who's head of the NSA, said this has thwarted, love that word, thwarted 54 terrorist attacks. When he was asked by the Senate Judiciary Committee, how many really pertain to the United States? Maybe 13. How many were thwarted? Well, we think in one case, NSA helped thwart it. So these people lie through their teeth. Why do they lie if it's legal?
Right. What the U.S. government or the NSA have repeatedly been saying to defend their activities is that it's necessary to protect America. It's necessary to protect our allies from terrorists all over the world.
Right.
And President Obama said you cannot have 100% privacy and 100% security at the time.
You can have
Do you
100%
agree with him?
Constitution, and that's what I'm arguing. Obama is wrong. It's a false dichotomy. You can have 100% Constitution, that is the guarantee to privacy under the Fourth Amendment, and then you could work out measures, constitutional measures, not illegal measures, to protect national security. You can do both. It's a false choice.
So, do you think it's a false choice? Do you think in this age of technology, privacy and security have not become incompatible goals?
I agree with Mr. McGovern that the Constitution should be respected. I'm not aware of any court cases that have ruled that the programs that have been revealed by Edward Snowden are unconstitutional. That hasn't happened yet. So there hasn't been any illegality. It's, again, this is a single 29-year-old, and I'm 29, so I should, but still, he's 29 years old. He's taking it upon himself, all branches of the U.S. government. And that's just inappropriate and wrong.
Why is it inappropriate?
Because
he says Edward Snowden
he's
says
sworn oath.
as
He's
an
betrayed his
individual,
colleagues. He's betrayed his. Why is it only
why
Edward
has
Snowden?
he betrayed his colleagues?
He betrayed his because he's when he signed.
He's no longer a colleague with them. He's like a.
Well, when he was there, he betrayed the people he worked for. If this was so horrible, the things that he's allegedly unveiled, then I would expect that hundreds, if not thousands, of NSA employees would all be leaving in protest. But we have one. We have one guy who left, which leaves me to think he's more of a crank than some sort of Thomas Jefferson.
Well, my colleague talks about court cases. Okay, there have been several court cases, but they've been not able to get forward for two reasons. One is national security is always invoked, and then secondly, people have been said to have no standing. Okay, now by virtue of these revelations, by virtue of the proof that General Clapper and General Alexander have both lied under oath, there is standing because we know the people have been harmed from this activity. And so just wait a couple of months. We're going to get some court cases.
Well, also, the other point I'd like to make is that the people have been harmed to the American people because the techniques that have been revealed, the methods by which our intelligence communities listen to terrorists, how they monitor terrorist communications, that's all now been revealed. And so our enemies, not just the Chinese, not just the Russians, but Al-Qaeda and other assorted terrorist groups, they're able to adapt their tactics and their communications because they know how we're listening.
James, are you saying that because the terrorists have access to the same kind of technologies, to the internet, to every kind of advanced technology, the NSA should use those technologies in order to basically fight them back?
What, could you be more specific?
Like, are you saying that the NSA has no choice but to use the technology to monitor almost all of our activities in order to fight the terrorists back because they are also using the internet?
We have to understand. Again, the phone records and phone calls and emails. The U.S. government does not have the capability to listen to all of these things. It takes a real paranoid.
The U.S. government is listening to Angela Merkel of Germany.
I will grant you
the Chancellor of Germany.
That was a mistake.
But they have the capability to do so.
And so does Vladimir Putin has the capability to do so.
But
and the German Chancellor, I should say, while it was wrong for us to be listening to her cell phone calls, the German Chancellor should not be conducting any serious and important business on a cell phone. It's not secure communication, as you would know. I'm not defending what they did.
Look, it was
wrong. It was wrong.
Wait a second. Look, there's a big difference here. That was legal.
That is true. That
Yeah.
was legal. That
All
is
right.
true. But wrong.
No.
Legal, but wrong.
No, I don't think it was wrong.
You don't think it was wrong?
No,
Okay.
you're
I
29
disagree
years
with you.
old. I spent 30 years, okay, 30 years, 1 year more year than you are old in intelligence, okay? Foreign intelligence is not only legal, it's required, okay?
Yeah, that's true.
What I object to is the violation of Americans' rights, okay? Under the Constitution, we should not be subjected to dragnet surveillance. I repeated the Fourth Amendment
So
to you. There's no way you can
right,
swear.
Can I ask you
are
the
you
question?
okay with NSA spying activities on global citizens, on other citizens, foreign citizens?
I'm okay as long as there's some adult supervision, okay? The technology is driving this, okay? General Alexander says, we can do this, and there's nobody adult enough to say, well, yeah, but have you done a cost-benefit analysis? Does it make sense after you've learned nothing from
You don't think
Angela
Edward
Merkel's
Snowden's?
phone?
You don't
I mean,
think
keep doing it
you don't
for
think
10 years?
you don't think Edward Snowden's revelations about spying on Angela Merkel has seriously hurt America's
No,
reputation
I have no.
and the transatlantic
no,
relationship?
Listen, talk to the NSA guys. What they say is, everyone knows that this goes on. Osama bin Laden's phone was tapped. His cell phone was followed, and how did he find out about that? From Senator Orrin Hatch. After 9/11, who said, we're going to find him right away because we monitor his cell phone. These people know, the terrorists know.
So why should it be publicized? Why does it need to be? I agree with you. Everyone should know this, but publicizing it causes diplomatic ruptures and it causes diplomatic problems.
It's just like Bradley Manning. They said, oh, this causes great damage. And Secretary of Defense Gates had to say, look, this is hyped up. He says, that, you know, it's greatly overwrought, all these charges, because no substantial harm has been done to our national security. And it's the same
Right,
with Edward
is
Snowden.
Edward Snowden also a hero to you?
He's a patriot. I don't use hero. Hero, you know,
But you call
people say, oh, he's a hero.
you
I
call
can't
Julian
do that.
Assange a hero.
I'm sorry?
You call Julian Assange a hero.
No, I didn't. I called him a patriot. Okay?
I think
He's
you
not
were
an
asked by a
American.
reporter whether he was a hero or traitor. You said hero, quote unquote.
Well,
A CNN reporter.
what Assange did is very consonant with our right to know what's going on in the world, and what he contributed to the wealth of knowledge about the war crimes that have taken place in Iraq and Afghanistan, and shooting innocent civilians trying to rescue other innocent civilians is by definition a war crime, okay? What Assange did in letting that stuff out with the help of Bradley Manning was
My
a
point is not
patriotic act.
Assange. My point is Edward Snowden. Why should one individual like Edward Snowden have the right to tell us what should be publicized and what shouldn't be publicized?
Because he swore an oath to defend the Constitution, that's why.
So is every other employee of the NSA, are they not upholding their right to the Constitution by not doing what he's doing?
99
in defecting in droves to Russia? Are
99
they not patriots?
James, as you know, 99% of the people kind of say, well, this is wrong, but, you know, I'm not going to stick my neck out. What's wonderful about Edward Snowden
I think that's a
is he
real
said,
indictment.
Look,
I
I'm
think
not
that's a
only-
really horrible thing to say about the people who work in our national
No, it's-
security, who work for the CIA, who
Look,
risk their
it's-
lives for our
it's-
country. To say that they're all just, you know, sheep
It's
following,
generally
going to
true.
slaughter.
Well,
I just find that
That's why you have so little.
it's incredibly narcissistic. It's incredibly narcissistic.
Narcissistic? What do you mean, narcissistic?
To assume that individuals like yourself in this little circle of so-called whistleblowers and Snowden, that you're the only heroes here, and you're the only ones following the law,
But if
and everyone else is just a sheep.
We have
and a
Daniel
lemming.
Ellsberg.
I find that incredibly narcissistic.
James, we have Daniel Ellsberg. He is the one who revealed
Yes,
the Pentagon
yes.
Papers. He was considered a hero at the time.
Well,
No, he
no,
wasn't.
now he's
After
considered
that,
a hero.
no,
No, he
Not at
wasn't.
the time,
He was
wasn't.
called every name in the book, the same names that Edward Snowden was called at the time. Now he's considered a
But
hero.
he wasn't.
Daniel
he
Hellsberg did
wasn't
not
prosecuted.
reveal any.
He was
He wasn't
prosecuted.
They dropped the
Was he
prosecution.
jailed?
No, they dropped the prosecution.
Yeah, they didn't. He
later,
was in jail
after they broke
So-
into a psychiatrist's office.
Nixon broke into a psychiatrist's office.
What Daniel Ellsberg revealed
What
was
is the
nothing
difference between- my
he
question
revealed a
is-
history of the Vietnam War.
Okay.
He did not reveal the sort of secrets that seriously harmed American national security and
But my
and
question is,
as Edward
if,
Snowden did.
James, my question is, if there are not some like quote unquote brave individuals to tell us what the government is doing, sometimes they could be engaged in wrongdoings, like in the Vietnam War.
course.
Like who else would do that?
Well, I just don't agree with you that Edward Snowden is one of these individuals. And I think that there are other avenues he could have gone through.
Why do you
but he's a
think
coward, and he could have gone to Congress. He could have gone to Dianne Feinstein.
Look,
he could have gone, but he
he's
chose
so-
not to. He chose to
no,
flee
he's-
his country and to go to China, to go to communist China, and then
No,
Russia.
Hey, James.
But does he have an alternative place to go?
He could have stayed in this country and
No.
faced
But
the
he could have-
music.
you could have
like your colleague, Mr. Drake. He could have done that.
Drake couldn't release.
But he could have
any
faced
kid
also the
because
same-
Drake was persecuted for 4
Persecuted?
years. Yeah. That's what, as soon as Snowden got out into Hong Kong, it was the only place he could go without being discovered, by the way, okay? When he got out, he said, look, I learned from the example of Thomas Drake and Bradley Manning. Manning was tortured, Drake was persecuted for 4 years, that if I wanted to achieve my mission, let the American people know what's going on, and I wanted to be reasonably safe for the period of time that allows me to do that, I had to get out of Dodge, and that's what he did. He never expected to end up in Moscow. That's the supreme irony. Never expected to end up in Moscow, and now he's in the safest place that he could possibly be on the planet.
James, but if we
he's living in a police state, that's true.
Edward Snowden says the reason that he didn't stay in America because he didn't believe he would get a fair trial. He would face like Bradley Manning.
I think Bradley Manning got a fair trial.
But he was in prison without charge for almost a year.
He didn't want to be found guilty is what he didn't want. Okay, he would receive a fair trial. And
but wasn't he in prison without charge?
Bradley Manning?
Yeah.
He was tortured for 8 months by the Marines in Quantico.
He was put into solitary confinement. I would not use the word torture to describe what he went through.
Well, the UN rapporteur for torture used the word, and I
that's the
take
UN
his
rapporteur.
word over yours with all due respect, James.
That's fine.
Right. I mean, while you completely support the revelations and you believe that NSA has gone out of control, most Americans don't. Like 6 out of 10 Americans believe that actually the revelations by Edward Snowden have harmed our national security, according to the Washington Post and ABC poll in November.
Those polls all depend on how the question is phrased. But in answer to your question, let's assume the polls are right. The answer is that most Americans don't see this program. Most Americans see a program run by the corporate interests that really guide our country and are profiteering from the wars that we're in, and are making lots of money by providing all this technical stuff. All the major telecoms and all, they're all complicit. So how could you expect the American people to be let in on this unless they have an internet connection with programs like this? They can't.
But they do have internet connection.
I think the media has been covering this extensively, this story, on all the cable networks and all the news channels, the major newspapers and websites. I think any American who wants to be informed about this could be informed, and you're right, most Americans see him as a traitor. Or as a defector at the very least.
That's not true.
But he believes that most Americans are driven by like channels like MSNBC and Fox
I think
News, which are very ideological.
Most Americans don't live in fear that the U.S. government is spying on them, because it's an absurd thing to think.
It was the same with the Germans
the
in
U.S.
1933.
Government, that's a preposterous
analogy
analogy to be making.
If you know about German history,
do you think it's really fair to make an analogy between Germany of that era and the United States?
It doesn't merit a response.
Because after their equivalent of 9/11, when the Reichstag
so you're a 9/11 truther as well? You're saying that the U.S. government...
I think
we need to know. He's comparing the 9/11 attacks to the Reichstag fire. Are you saying the U.S. government blew up the World Trade Center? I'm asking you.
Let me know when I can say something.
Can he let him give his chance? Okay.
I'm saying that in 1933, after the communists burned down the German parliament, Hitler was able to introduce...
we have less than 1 minute left to end this segment of the show.
On a very nice note here.
All kinds of extraordinary laws, very much like the Patriot Act, which allowed people to eavesdrop on their conversations, break and enter into their desks, and do all the other kinds of things that NSA has been found out to be doing. And the German people watched it all happen as at a box at the theater. It all just happened. That's why it scares me to death that most Americans don't seem to be appropriately concerned about what's going on.
We now have to take a short break, but after the break we will come back to dig a little bit deeper on the subject. Hello again and welcome back to Inside America. Today we are discussing whether the concept of privacy and national security have become incompatible in this age of globalized modern technology. For this segment of the discussion, we have another guest, and that's Richard Weitz. He's a senior fellow and director of the Center for Political Military Analysis at Hudson Institute. That's a think tank here in Washington, D.C. His current research includes regional security developments relating to Europe, Eurasia, and East Asia, as well as the U.S., foreign defense and homeland security policies. Thank you so much for joining us, Richard. Let me start with you by asking a question about whether the revelations by Edward Snowden have harmed U.S. national security in any way.
I would think so. I mean, it's a bit early to tell, but you've already seen bad developments from that perspective. Strained relations between the United States and European allies, a desire of many countries to distance themselves from the U.S. It's basically a repeat of the WikiLeaks scandal, where they're concerned that anything they tell us is going to appear in the Washington Post a couple days from now. And that kind, basically a lot of diplomatic tensions. But we haven't experienced an upsurge in terrorist attacks or anything, but that may be possible.
Are you blaming Edward Snowden for that, or the NSA for doing it in the first place?
Well, that's a very good question, where the blame lies. I mean, one where you could intersect the two blames is the NSA should not have had an internal system that allowed one person to be able to collect all this type of data when he had no reason to do so. I mean, there was clearly problems in how they were sharing data internally. Some of the revelations are obviously you would perhaps question in advance. I mean, I think as Ray McGovern said earlier, there's some concern that there wasn't sufficient political oversight. I mean, just because we have the capacity to do something doesn't mean we should do it. There should have been somebody asking the costs and benefits of any.
Can you mention any of those kind of revelations that you think should have been revealed?
The Merkel revelation is an obvious one. I mean, somebody should have asked at some point, at least reviewed whether the danger and the problems that would come if this became public outweigh any possible gains the U.S. is acquiring. There have been that's an obvious one.
Like listening to Angela Merkel's phone conversations or monitoring her emails. As a former intelligence analyst and officer, do you think that is necessary for the United States? Should the NSA have the right to do so?
Yes, they have the right to do so, but whether it's necessary is a political judgment. What I'm saying is that there was no adult supervision in the White House or anywhere else that looked at the situation and said, all right, just because you can collect everything, does it make sense to do that? Does it, in fact...
Does it make sense listening to the phone calls of your friends, European allies?
Well, you know, I'm an intelligence officer. Yeah, it makes sense under certain circumstances. But does it make sense to collect everything on everyone? When you monitor Angela Merkel's cell phone and you find out after 2 years all you're getting is what she has with a Sauerbraten on Sunday afternoon, you ought to stop it. But there was no check on that. As a matter of fact, I have a very interesting quote from Senator Lindsey Graham, who's one of the overseers, who's supposed to be writing herd on this kind of thing, especially in the Defense Department. And this is what he said just 2 years ago. Who wants to be the congressman or senator holding the hearing as to whether the president should be going aggressively after terrorists? Nobody. And that's why Congress has been AWOL in this whole area. Now, for the younger people, AWOL is absent without leave. And here he says it, one of the most prominent congressmen. So there was no oversight in Congress. The oversight committees had become the overlooked committees because they couldn't risk, just as in my day, you couldn't risk appearing to be soft on communism. Today, you can't risk being soft on terrorism. So there was no oversight. And the White House also exerted no overhead. So these things have blowback. What you have to do is a calculated decision as to whether a risk assessment has been made. If Angela Merkel finds out about this, is it really worth the chance to try to do this stuff? And clearly it wasn't, and it shouldn't have been tried.
Now, this issue, of course, came up in the congressional hearings, and whereas the NSA was apologetic about some practices, the head of the agency said, and others have said, of course you're going to listen to foreign governments' leaders. I mean, if you want to learn what their policies are, why they're doing them, that's a great source of information. But and it's hard to argue against that. That if you want, and his argument was that it's actually not necessarily harmful for them. I mean, if the U.S. knows precisely what their goals are in, for example, trade negotiations, then the U.S. can adopt policies that will meet their concerns without having to make a public concession or anything. Well, basically, it's the political decision makers who decide what the intelligence community does. So During the Cold War, it was clear a desire to find weaknesses in the Soviet system, prevent the Soviets from recruiting Americans, stealing American secrets, and so on. Yes, in more recent years, it's been more to detect terrorist plots, prevent infiltration by terrorists as well as foreign agents. Now, economic goals, human rights goals, you're concerned about perhaps vulnerabilities, attempts to hurt dissidents in a particular country. You want to protect them, know when you need to take them out of the country if they're under danger, protect American lives, advance general economic interests. I mean, they're not supposed to, and I've not seen a revelation that they're going to help Coca-Cola steal a better soft drink secret. So they're not supposed to help individual companies.
Do you think, let me go back to the initial question that I asked in the first part of the discussion. Do you think we should give up some of our privacy for security?
Well, I mean, I think most people say, in principle, yes, but then you argue over where you draw the line. You have to figure out how insecure you feel. I mean, clearly Americans have changed that perception radically. During the 1990s, there was not perceived to be a major threat, Cold Wars ever. After 2001, there was a strong fear of further terrorist attacks. In recent years, we've seen a bit of a walk back, including by the Obama administration, trying to roll back some of the freedoms that might have been sacrificed in the Patriots. And that's bipartisan. There are people on the right and the left.
I'd like to ask your question, how insecure we feel from another perspective. How insecure we feel as a result of NSA's surveillance, massive surveillance.
Well, this is the $64 question, okay? If the objective is to prevent terrorist incidents here, we are less secure by virtue of NSA's mammoth collection. Why do I say that? Before 9/11, and as people assessed what happened before 9/11, they said, well, we had all this information, but it was like trying to drink from a fire hose. Try to drink from a fire hose. We couldn't segregate out the nuggets that we needed to know. Now they don't use the fire hose anymore. Now what they use is the haystack. And I can't believe my ears, but the heads of NSA are saying now we have to add more hay. We got to get all the hay in there so that we'll be sure to find the needle. Well, it doesn't make any sense. And what's happening meanwhile? Well, I was just making some notes here, thinking about the terrorist events that weren't prevented because of all this diversion of talent and effort from the traditional intelligence analyst police work. Let's start with the first one. First one I noted here was Major Hassan, okay? Killed 13 people, wounded 30, okay? The Army knew chapter and verse about his beliefs, didn't share them with the rest of the intelligence community. Next one, Abdul Muttalib, the underwear bomber, okay? Who was he? He was the son of a very rich banker in Nigeria. The rich banker went to the embassy and said, hey, my son's gone off the deep end. He's gone to Yemen. I don't know what he's going to do now. And they missed it. Over Detroit, he had that bomb, and luckily some passengers sat on the bomb. That was lucky. Next one, al-Balawi, the fellow from Jordan, who killed 7 of my former colleagues, the CIA, by virtue of not tracing who he was. He was a double agent, and he got infiltrated.
Are you saying that some of NSA's activities are totally ineffective?
I'm saying that the diversion to all this accumulated information is diverting the people from looking at the traditional ways of finding terrorists. Okay. The other one I'd cite would be the Times Square
But how can
bomb.
traditional ways of finding terrorists work in this
technological age? That's the
age?
argument I would like to make.
Good.
The common argument is when you and I were I never joined the intelligence community, but I was considered it, and you did that. The kind of techniques you learn, tradecraft, the kind of what you would do is you'd be signed to a foreign embassy under diplomatic cover. And that would allow you to interact with the Russian Soviets and learn from them and get defectors. Now we can't, having diplomatic cover means that you're not going to be able to infiltrate a terrorist group. So you have to take other techniques, and so that's why they're groping around.
You need to also take advantage of...
Well, I mean really basic, simple things. The fellow, the Times Square bomber, Pakistani born, goes back to where his village is in Northwest Frontier Agency. A lot of his people have been killed, comes back into the country and is hell-bent and determined to exact revenge. Luckily, some street vendor saw that there was a bomb in his car, and we were prevented from it. Now, how about the 2 Boston bombers? The Russians told us twice, these guys are really, really dangerous. Where was the FBI? They were down on Boston Commons monitoring Occupy, okay? So these things are missed. They're egregious errors in tradecraft, and I suggest that all this emphasis on technical collection is not only counterproductive, but illegal. And you're with the Hudson Institute, you may know that General Bill Odom, who was head of the NSA in January of 2006, when he found out that General Michael Hayden, one of his successors, was allowing this kind of thing, said, General Michael Hayden should be court-martialed. It's clearly against the law. He should be court-martialed. And General...
On that note, can I
Yep.
take another
Sure.
short break, but
Yep.
we'll be back to discuss the subject further. But what kinds of domestic impacts do Snowden's revelations have in the United States? Have they done anything in terms of undermining public trust to the extent that major reform is now inevitable? Stay with us, you'll know more on that subject after a short break. Hello again and welcome back to Inside America. Have privacy and security become incompatible goals? This is the question I'm discussing now with the 2 guests here in Washington, D.C. But let me, Richard, start with you by asking a question about the impacts that Edward Snowden's revelations may have had here domestically. Have they undermined public trust? And do you think it's now time to undertake some major reforms?
I have not noticed a major change in American attitudes on this. It doesn't appear, and most of the revelations that are coming out are concerning foreign U.S. activities and against foreigners and foreign countries in which Americans are sort of crept up in because of the technology. It's hard to segregate U.S. and non-U.S. action. So there have been some protests, but it's not been I haven't noticed it being a major factor. It hasn't affected any elections and so on. Reforms, most definitely. I mean, clearly a lot of things went wrong, and I could come up with a long list of them, NSA and Congress and executives. So yes, we're going to definitely need some reforms.
Do you think the public trust has been undermined in any way by Edward Snowden's revelations?
I think the public have been informed more than having their trust undermined. To think that Google and Microsoft and all those folks were making big bucks by deceiving their customers, by letting the government in the back door, and then pretending that these were secure networks, that trust has been eroded, and it's going to take a lot to get that back. So, I think that when Sensenbrenner, the congressman who pretty much authored the Patriot Act, very draconian piece of legislation, when he is in high dudgeon, which he's very upset, and says that the head of national intelligence who lied under oath should be not only fired but prosecuted, well, that's a symptom as to how the legislators feel about these secret interpretations of what they thought was a fairly good law right after 9/11. So that's the kind of trust that's important. And what needs to happen is that Sensenbrenner and those folks need to gird their loins and not be afraid of seeming or being criticized as being less than 110% against terrorism. They need to protect our civil liberties. They need, as Ed Snowden did, to honor their sacred oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
It seems to me like that people are now extra cautious. There's more self-censorship, not only here in the United States, but globally, after knowing the fact that what an intelligence organization like the NSA can do.
Some, maybe abroad, U.S. not some. I think most people just reacted with amazing. Wow, 5 billion. So basically, you get so overwhelmed by these numbers, you think there's not much you can do if you're concerned about this. And so, it's possible. I worry that the people who are going to take the countermeasures are those people who have something to hide, i.e., the terrorists or foreign intelligence agencies. Clearly, the Chinese are enjoying learning about, that we actually managed to infiltrate the mainframe in their main MIT, equivalent of main university, and they're using this to justify their own cyber methods. Same with the Russians. They just reorganize how they do their media. So I think you're seeing malicious actors, or potentially malicious actors, respond to deal with these threats, which if they did not know about them already. Americans, I mean, realistically, how are we going to work without a cell phone or email? So what can you do if you or I or anyone else? There's not much you can.
You mentioned China and other countries, how they are now thinking about what the NSA has been doing. I would like to ask whether you think that technology has come to the center of not intelligence capability, but also how you succeed in other fields like commerce, like trade on a global scale. It's basically your success is defined by how skilled you are in using these technologies.
Yes, that's often the case. I mean, not always. Obviously, if you're a creative person, a writer, an artist, then maybe
I'm talking about the government scale.
Right.
Like nations.
Right. In terms of if you want to
realized.
become a great economy, like Kazakhstan, for example, they had their national day coming up in their reception yesterday, and they're clearly eager to become a major center of international information technology, and just like you want to be develop nanotechnology and so on. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of countries see information technology as central to their economic well-being and perhaps their national security. And, insofar as the NSA was thinking of exploiting that, it's going to be a lot harder now to use that as a means to gain more information about what their intents are and what they plan to do.
So while technology has certainly empowered the NSA and other intelligence organizations, haven't they also made them more vulnerable?
That's a very good point. These technologies have a democratic effect in some ways internationally because they level the playing field. Now we know about Stuxnet. We know that the United States and Israel have already used cyber warfare against Iran. So we started it. Now, you don't need $50 billion to build a battleship or stealth bombers anymore. All you need is some really smart people. And China and Iran and others have those really smart people, just as smart as our people. And that's the wave of the future. So by letting this cat out of the bag, unless we can do what we used to do 30, 40 years ago, get together and figure out how to regulate this, how to prevent, for example, in those days, the placement of nuclear weapons in space. We got together and we prevented that.
So in the time where you were an intelligence officer, we could say that all the work was done in real on the ground, but now it's done in the cyberspace.
No, I would during the Soviet we got a lot of good intelligence during the Cold War from space-based satellite sensors, some intercepts in the communications. I mean, what's different was NSA capabilities were a lot less, so they could maybe focus in on a key couple Russian or Soviet or Chinese communications, but they couldn't do this massive sweep of everything. I mean, what they do now...
But traditionally, you might have needed to send somebody into a group.
Ideally.
You still do, but like to a much lesser extent.
Now, we're talking about offensive capabilities. That's what's different. And cyber warfare, intelligence collection, we all did that. It was very lucrative. That's how we could monitor arms control agreements. But now, cyber warfare, destroying people's centrifuges, destroying people's other things, well, that's the wave of the future, just like drones. And in both cases, the United States is going to be hurting because no longer can they pour billions of dollars into capabilities that nobody else has because everyone else will have this particular capability.
Even China, I read it in the news like a few weeks or months ago that it undermined some of the highly advanced defense missile defense systems of the United States. They could get the designs. They hacked into all.
Well, there's a difference between getting the designs and undermining. I mean, maybe the designs they got weren't real designs. Maybe the CIA fed them designs we want them to think, so they're not going to actually know. They're designing countermeasures that we against systems that don't actually exist. Maybe they got their designs, but they're not going to build the physical capabilities to challenge it. We just don't know. I mean, going back to Ray made a very interesting observation is twofold. One, that there are these new offensive capabilities, and also there's this question of how maybe you could have some kind of diplomacy to limit that. But as you well know, this is a lot harder than the kind of arms control we were going over. And the thing about cyber conflicts is it's really hard to know, because we haven't really done them and the playing field is constantly changing, what the effects would be. I mean, there's some indications, for example, that the Stuxnet attack took out an Indian satellite. Nobody thought about that. Who knows where these things can go?
Now, I would like
to
sum up the conversation with just a couple of questions. Ray, if you're the president of the NSA or the president of the United States, what kind of reforms will you do in this regard?
Well, I work with the Congress. There are some legislation, there's a lot of some bills now that are in process. I would come to sensible regulations of this activity. The foreign activities are lawful for the most part. The domestic activities are on their face unconstitutional and therefore unlawful. The president needs not to kind of say, well, we can't have 100% constitution. That's what he's saying, okay? These things can be done according to the law, and they will make us safer, not less safe.
What will be your plan? You said some major
right, I would have, my
thinking
is a little more targeted or less ambitious. It's that, I mean, the NSA clearly, there's a clear problem with oversight. I mean, it failed in 3 levels. The executive branch, I mean, President Obama said he didn't know about the Merkel intercepts or a bunch of other things. That in the Congress, I was very disappointed in the oversight that's come out. I mean, Dianne Feinstein's very she didn't know about things. She's head of the chairman of the, one of the committees there. And the courts, as far as we're telling, they have special courts. The FISA judges, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court judges, would look at this and say, well, look, you're violating this, you're violating that. And then they authorize the program and say, you got to correct it. And then they come back 6 months later and say, well, you're still violating this. But there's got to be stronger oversight in all 3 levels, because the capabilities are just amazing. And as we're learning from the revelations, they're going to get better. And there's got to be somebody. It's if you're an intelligence agency, like Henry Kissinger said, I want to know everything. So just get me everything you can.
Well, he already knew everything.
Right, but you need somebody who needs to make the cost-benefit analysis. I mean, you got each program.
Like on specific issues like collecting data on phone calls,
right,
all over the world,
right,
or
right.
I'm
more positive about that than Ray is.
Do you think that should stop?
No, I think that if they're just keeping track of what phones call what other phones, now the problem is you are picking up Americans, I grant you, and so you're maybe it's not 100% of the Constitution, maybe it's only 90%, because you are kicking up inadvertently Americans you're not supposed to, or people living in the U.S. But if a lot of these calls are heading to one place in Pakistan and they're connected to one place in New York, well, maybe you want to check that out, and that's the one case they told us about when they claimed to intercept a terrorist attack, because they'll see that.
That's legal. That's legal. That's always been possible.
So do you think the NSA's, just in less than 1 minute, NSA's massive collection of data on phone calls, on locations of people all over the world should stop?
Not all over the world. There's a sharp distinction I make between...
But in the United States,
in the United States, it should be regulated according to the Constitution. If they want to pass new laws, let them do so. But everything can be done legally, and that's the way we used to do things in this country. This is very new, to take the Constitution and say, well, it doesn't matter, it's quaint or it's obsolete.
But you recall the word uses in the 1970s.
We have reached
yeah, that's why they put in the FISA Act.
We've reached the end of the discussion. Ray McGovern, a former CIA analyst, thank you so much for your strong comments. Richard White, fellow at the Hudson Institute, thank you so much for your strong comments as well. To
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. Dear viewers, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, be well.